You've saved $1,200,000 for retirement. Then your 35-year-old daughter calls and asks for $50,000 toward a down payment on a house. Every instinct in you says yes. You spent decades building that number so you'd finally have something real to give, and this feels like exactly what it was all for. Maybe you've been picturing this moment since your first retirement statement showed up in the mail, the day you could finally hand your kid a real head start instead of just advice. But almost nobody mentions the piece that actually matters when they tell you to be generous. That single $50,000 gift could end up costing you more than $150,000 in lost growth and lost protection by the time you're in your 80s. Not because helping your daughter with a house is wrong. It was never about whether you could afford the check today. It's that being the generous parent is quietly becoming the biggest risk to your own retirement. And nobody warns you about that part before you sign it. Over the next few minutes, I'll show you exactly how that math works, why your brain says yes before you've run a single number, and a simple way to protect both the relationship and the retirement behind it. If you're getting close to retirement age and you want to help your kids without quietly sabotaging your own future, stay with me. This is the conversation almost nobody has out loud, and once you see the math behind it, it changes how you'll look at every single request that comes after this one. That $50,000 gift today could cost you more than $150,000 in lost future income and health care protection. The mechanism behind that number is straightforward. If you'd left that $50,000 invested in a balanced portfolio earning 6% a year, in 20 years it grows to roughly $160,000. Give it away instead, and you don't just lose the growth. You lose part of the cash buffer that protects you if the market drops hard in your first 5 years of retirement, which is exactly when a downturn does the most permanent damage to a portfolio you're already drawing from. And that number you just heard isn't even the full picture. It doesn't count what happens if a market drop and a health crisis land in the same year, which is more common than most people think, and we'll walk through exactly that scenario later in this video. The trap here isn't that you're careless with money. It's that good parent and generous parent have quietly become the same word in your head, and nobody ever hands you the other side of that equation. The financial mechanism is simple once you see it. You lose the compounding on whatever you give away. You lose part of the buffer that gets you through a bad market in your first years of retirement, and you increase how exposed you are to a healthcare bill you haven't funded yet. None of those three costs show up the day you write the check. They show up 10 or 20 years later when it's much harder to undo. One number makes this concrete. The average monthly cost for a private room in a nursing home is $10,025, according to the most recent Genworth Cost of Care survey. That's not a distant, abstract figure. That's a bill that lands every single month, for as long as the care is needed, and it's one of the few expenses in retirement that doesn't wait for a good market year. Research from the National Institute on Retirement Security found that 70% of retirees who help their adult children financially end up cutting their own retirement spending by 20% or more. That's not a warning about being generous once. That's what happens when generosity becomes a pattern with no floor under it. And separately, the Employee Benefit Research Institute has tracked that actual retiree spending tends to decline another 1 to 2% a year after age 75, right as care needs are climbing. Less money coming in on the exact years you need more of it going out. This isn't about being a bad parent. It's about protecting the person who's going to need that care in 20 years, and that person is you. But there's a part that stings a little more. Even if you decide, logically, not to give as much, your brain is going to fight you on it. After 30 years of disciplined saving, your identity is wired to say yes to your kids, and that's the exact same wiring that makes it almost impossible to spend $1 on yourself. You spent 3 decades being the responsible one, maxing out contributions, driving the same car longer than you probably should have, skipping the vacation so the number in the account kept climbing. Somewhere in there, your brain built a pathway that treats spending as danger. That pathway doesn't switch off the day your balance crosses 7 figures. So when your daughter asks for help, saying yes feels safe, almost automatic, because it matches the identity you've had for 30 years. But when you try to spend that same money on yourself, on a trip, on help around the house, something in you says no, because it registers as a threat instead of a reward. If that sounds familiar, you're not broken, and you're not alone in it. This is completely normal, and it's worth sitting with for a second, instead of rushing past it. It's the exact same instinct that made you a millionaire in the first place. The habit that built the number is the same habit that now makes it hard to enjoy the number. And it's also the habit that leaves you exposed to giving away more than you can actually afford. Because saying yes still feels like the responsible choice, even when the math says otherwise. There's a small shift that helps here. Instead of thinking of yourself only as the saver, think of yourself as the steward of your own future health and independence. When you frame a gift as a trade against your own care 15 or 20 years from now, saying no gets easier, not because you're being selfish, but because you're protecting the one person nobody else is going to protect for you. Nobody else is coming to fund that account on your behalf. I used to believe that if you had the money, you should share it freely. That generosity was basically always the right move. I changed my mind after watching people I'd worked with struggle to afford basic home health care because they'd given too much to their kids over the years, with no plan behind any of it. Generosity without a plan isn't generosity. It's a slow leak in your own retirement. So how do you actually hold a boundary here without damaging the relationship? Most advice stops at just say no, which is close to useless when it's your own kid on the phone. What actually works is a system, and that's what we'll build next. Picture the version of this where there's no plan at all. You give $50,000 now for the down payment. A year later, your son needs help getting a small business off the ground, so there's another $40,000. Then your daughter needs help with childcare costs, and that's another $60,000 over a couple of years. None of these feel reckless in the moment. Each one is a reasonable ask from someone you love. But add them up and you've given away $150,000, while healthcare costs keep rising around 5% a year in the background. By the time you're 80, you're cutting your own spending by 30%, and you still can't comfortably afford a home health aide when you need one. Now picture the other version. You decide ahead of time that you'll give no more than 5% of your portfolio in any single year, and only after your own healthcare buffer is already funded. You open a separate account just for family gifts, and when it's empty for the year, the giving pauses, no negotiation required. You give your daughter $10,000 toward the house, with an honest conversation attached to it. This is what we can do without putting our own future at risk. Your kids might be disappointed in the moment. Most of them respect the clarity once they sit with it, and you sleep better knowing you haven't quietly traded your own care for their convenience. The math here matters more than it looks like it does. Medicare Part B premiums rose 6% in 2025 alone, and that trend line isn't reversing. A portfolio pulling out 5% a year has roughly a 70% chance of lasting 30 years, compared to about 95% at a 4% withdrawal rate. That's not a small gap. That 1 percentage point is the difference between probably fine and probably not. I've seen this play out with people close to me. A couple I knew gave $30,000 to their son for a business that didn't survive its second year. Not long after, the husband needed a hip replacement, and they couldn't cover the out-of-pocket cost without pulling from their own retirement account. It was avoidable, and it still happened, because nobody had drawn a line ahead of time. But even with a giving budget in place, there's a risk you can't plan your way around directly, and that's the market itself. What happens if it drops hard in the exact year you're also trying to help your kids? That's the scenario almost nobody plans for. Picture this. You're 63, freshly retired, sitting on $1,200,000. You've already agreed to give your daughter $20,000 toward her down payment. Then the market drops 25% in your first year of retirement. Your portfolio falls to $900,000, and you're still withdrawing 4% a year to cover living expenses. On top of that, your wife is diagnosed with a chronic condition that runs about $12,000 a year in costs insurance doesn't touch. Without a plan, this is usually how it goes. You panic and stop the giving, but the $20,000 is already gone, so the pause doesn't undo the damage. To cover medical bills, you end up selling investments at a loss, right when the portfolio can least afford it. That gap never fully closes, because the money you sold off in a down year never gets the chance to recover with the rest of the market. By the time you're 75, you've burned through 40% of what you had, and every decision after that gets made from a place of fear instead of choice. With a plan, the same year looks very different. You've already got 2 years of living expenses sitting in a cash buffer, which is roughly what Fidelity recommends specifically to protect against a bad market hitting early in retirement. You pause discretionary giving without drama, because that was always part of the plan, not a panic move. Living expenses come out of the cash buffer instead of the falling portfolio, which gives your investments time to recover, instead of forcing you to sell at the bottom. Your wife's costs come out of a health savings account you funded years earlier for exactly this kind of situation. The portfolio recovers, and giving resumes later, at a level your future self can actually afford. This is the number that makes the buffer worth building in the first place. A couple retiring at 65 can expect to spend around $315,000 on health care over the rest of retirement, according to Fidelity's most recent estimate, and that's before anything unusual happens. Add a diagnosis your insurance doesn't fully cover, or a market drop in the wrong year, and that number stops being an average and starts being your actual bill. So you need 3 things working together: a cash buffer, a giving budget, and a healthcare plan that's funded before anything else gets a dollar. But there's one more piece almost everyone misses, and it's not a spreadsheet problem. It's permission. Because if you can't actually spend any of this on yourself, what was the entire point of saving it? Start by calculating what I'd call your healthcare floor. Before you give a single dollar to anyone, figure out the minimum your portfolio needs to hold to cover healthcare costs on its own. Using Fidelity's $315,000 estimate for a couple, plus a 20% buffer on top, That floor comes out to $378,000. If your total portfolio is $1,200,000, your safe to give amount is $1,200,000 minus $378,000, which leaves $822,000. You're free to give from that surplus. You never touch the floor. Second, open a separate account just for family gifts. Fund it with no more than 5% of your portfolio each year. When that account runs dry, the giving stops for the year, and there's nothing to argue about, because the number already made the decision for you. This also makes conversations with your kids easier, because you're not improvising an answer under pressure. You're pointing to a plan you built months earlier, calmly, with a clear head. Third, use what I'd call the permission to spend rule. Every month, move a fixed amount into a separate checking account that exists purely for you, for travel, hobbies, dinners out, whatever actually makes your life better. If you don't spend it by month's end, send it to a cause you care about, instead of letting it quietly pile back into savings. That one rule is often what finally breaks the habit of saving reflexively and never spending at all, a habit that took 30 years to build and won't unwind on its own. I worked with someone who set this up almost exactly. He funded a $15,000 fun money account, and for the entire first month, he couldn't bring himself to spend a dime of it. By the third month, he was booking a trip he'd been putting off for years. By the end of that year, he told me it was one of the better financial decisions he'd made, not because of the dollar amount, but because he finally felt some freedom in money he'd been sitting on for decades. I still think about another couple who gave $30,000 to their son for a business that failed within 2 years. Right after that, the husband needed a hip replacement, and they had to borrow against their own retirement account to cover it. It stuck with me because every part of it was avoidable, and none of it came from bad intentions. It came from never drawing a line in advance, from treating each gift as its own decision instead of part of a bigger picture with real limits. If this framework is landing for you, that's exactly the kind of thing this channel keeps covering, the risks near retirement that nobody spells out in advance. Becoming a millionaire doesn't automatically make you secure. The real work happens after the number is already there. Protecting your future self from your own generosity, from a scarcity mindset that won't turn off, and from a market that doesn't care what your calendar looks like. Calculate your healthcare floor. Set a giving budget, and give yourself actual permission to spend some of what you built. None of this means loving your kids less or turning into someone who counts every dollar out loud at the dinner table. It means putting your own oxygen mask on first, so you're still able to help anyone at all 20 years from now, instead of becoming the person who needs the help. You worked hard for this money for a long time. At some point, it's supposed to work for you too, not only for your kids, but for the person you're going to be in 20 years. If this helped you see your own situation a little differently, that's exactly what this channel is for. I'll see you in the next one.